So today's tutorial is going to explain how you can take GIS data, in this case, this DEM file, and turn this into a realistic site section perspective that can serve as a starting point for your studio project. My goal for you today is to let you create something that looks like this. Something that looks like this. So I took a section of the levee wall next to the P River. This is Summerlin Park. At the end of the tutorial today, my goal is that you can make something like this. So here's what we do. I have GIS open, and I just imported in that LiDAR 1 meter DEM. After you've brought in that 1 meter resolution LiDAR file, I'm just going to make this a little bit lighter so it's easier to see. I'm just going to change the color scheme. You want to zoom in, and you're going to want to pick a location to model. So for today's demo, I'm going to zoom into, I'm going to turn on world imagery so we can see the background. I'm going to zoom in. We're going to create a model of this little area right here with that levee wall right there. So let's say this is your site, and we want to create a section perspective of this area right here. First thing we need to do is we need to create what's called a section extents, basically a rectangle that represents that portion of this area that we're going to model in 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the catalog, and I'm going to go into the folders of our catalog, expand that, and you should see one of the folders with a little house next to it. That folder is where you have your geodatabase. So I'm going to expand that folder with a house next to it. And then you'll see a little cylinder that has the name of this project with .gdb. That's the geodatabase. So in the geodatabase, I'm going to create a new feature class. Right click on that, and then you choose new. And then right there is this called feature class right there. Choose feature class, and this brings up options that allow you to create a feature class that will add elements into. So I'll call this one section extents. Make sure that the feature class type is set as polygon. Choose next. Next, make sure that the coordinate system in spatial reference is chosen as the NAD 1983 state plane east US feet. Next, 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 and then finish. Basically, you don't need to really change any of the other options when you're creating this feature class. So what's going to happen now, you see in the table of contents on the side, section extents is added in as a new element in your mapping file here. I'm going to click on this little symbology right there. I'm just going to change it to an outline. So let's do simple black outline. And then I'm going to go to properties, change the color to be a red color so we can easily see it when we create elements, and then choose apply. So it's just going to be a red outline. Now, with section extents selected, I'm going to create a box that represents the extent of this area that we're going to model. So in the edit tab of GIS at the top, there's a little create button. So I choose create. And then you see here on the right side, a create features window pops up. We'll choose section extents right there. And then there's these drawing options that we can create. We're going to choose this one that's a square. And then you should be able to create what's called a 3-point rectangle. What that means is you can click once, then set the starting axis of the rectangle, click again, then set the height of that rectangle like so, and then click again, and you've created this rectangle shape. And what you want to think about when you're creating this rectangle is how this is going to look when it's in modeled in 3D. So if this is not what you want, just do it again. So in this case, let's try it again. So I'll choose select in the edit tab, select the one I just drew, then hit delete to get rid of that. And we'll just do it again. So I'll go back to the create tab, choose the section extents, choose the rectangle. Let's do this instead. Let's try to make this section sort of align with this bridge, this road here. So it's a little bit more parallel to that. And then we'll kind of try to capture like a good chunk of Summerlin Park, like right there, like that. Once you're done with all this, you can check finish, and then make sure you choose save in the edit tab to complete the edit session. And then if you have any of these boxes selected by chance, you can always choose clear in the edit tab. Now that you've gone to this stage here, we need to take these rectangles and we need to convert that rectangle into a grid of points. So here's how we do that. I'm going to go to my geoprocessing window, and then we're going to go to export to CAD. So you can just, that should be the first option you see. We'll choose that geoprocess. And then input features, we're going to choose the section extents that we just created. So add that into the first line. Output type, just leave it as DWG version 2018. That's totally okay. In output file, we'll choose the folder next to that name, and I'm going to save it on my desktop. And then in environments, you choose in the output coordinate system, current map. so that it inputs the current coordinate system into this export. That's all you need to do, and then you can choose run. Okay, so I have Rhino open. The first thing we do in Rhino is you always double check the units to make sure that whenever we start working, we're in the same exact units that we are working with in ArcGIS. So in ArcGIS, we're working in feet. I just type in units, and it will bring up the document properties and immediately go to the units portion of that. And right there, you see model units is in feet. That's all I'm checking for. I'm just checking to make sure that's in feet. If that's in feet, I just choose OK. And now we're going to import that CAD file. So I'll type in import into the command line. And then right here, section extents. This is the CAD I just exported. I'll click on that and I'll choose open. And then it says these import options. I'm going to choose make sure that the model units are set to feet. That's very important. So I'll click OK. And now it's imported. Now you don't see anything yet because it imported in the georeference location. So the first thing you do when you imported a file into Rhino is you just click on this little button right here. It says zoom selected. Look, circles on that. I just click on that and you see it automatically zooms to those pieces that we've imported. If I click on the top view and then choose that, it automatically zooms to that in the top view, like so. It's just an easy way to find the location of this. So what we need to do now is we need to take these two rectangles that we've created and we need to turn them into a grid of points. And the only way that I know how to do this that's super easy is to use a Grasshopper script that I've written for you, so you don't need to write it yourself. The way you open Grasshopper is just type in Grasshopper, and it's going to open up this little window that brings up a visual programming interface. So what you should do is you should go to File, Open Document, and then look for the file that I gave you in Box, this file called Rectangle to Grid of Points. So if you open that in Grasshopper, I've written out the instructions for you. Right-click on Curve. Step 2, set one curve. In Rhino, choose one of the rectangles. Let's choose that. If done correctly, you'll see a grid of points. What has happened is that I've taken this rectangle, I've taken the dimensions of the sides of the rectangle and used that to basically create a grid of points within it based off of this number here. So all you basically need to understand is this, is that at this step right here, this number sort of represents the spacing of each of these points. For the purposes of this exercise, I want you to kind of stick between 3 and 5. The more points you use, the more processing that you got to do. For this little area that I've done here, I think 3 is fine. And then the last step is right here. Right-click on the point component, click on the bake button, which is a little egg, choose bake, and then you choose a layer in Rhino to bake the points on. I'll just choose layer 1 and click OK. That's it. Now you can basically close this tool. And what just happened now in Rhino, you see that we've created all of these points. You can select these points. You can see that they're actually, it's actual geometry. So I'm going to click on points, right click on that layer, then choose select objects. That just selects every single element on that layer instantaneously. Then while those are selected, I'll go to File, Export Selected in Rhino, and then we're just going to save over the original DWG we've created. So I'm going to set the type of this export to be DWG, and you see that section extents. I'll just save over it. I'll click Save, and then in Export Scheme, 2007 Natural. I choose OK. Now, Rhino, we're done with that for now. Let's minimize Rhino. Let's go back into GIS. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring in that CAD file that we just exported out of Rhino into GIS. So we'll go into the catalog, and then I need to connect to the folder that has that DWG. In this case, it's on my desktop. So I'll just really quickly just right-click on folders, add folder connection, go to my desktop, click OK. Now desktop is in our folders there. I'll expand that. Section extents. I'll expand this little arrow, but the one we want to use is the point feature. I'll click on that and I'll drag that into GIS. It's adding all these points. So here's what you got to do. You need to right click on this point layer, then go to data, choose export features. And we're going to export this point data set into your geodatabase. Input features, that's the layer that you've chosen to export it out. Output features, we'll just call this one section elevation points. Okay. Next thing you need to do is you need to expand this fields tab right there. And you see that there are all these fields that come with this export. We need to actually remove a few of these fields. So the easiest way to do that is you can just click on X next to the field, and we're going to delete almost all of these fields except for elevation. So when I get to elevation, I'm just going to hop over that. So elevation. Now I'm just gonna go with the next one, delete these ones. Okay. So the only elevation is left right there. So when you do that, the last step, this is the most important step. You go to environments, right here, output coordinate system. You need to expand that and choose current map. And then it inputs that coordinate system of the current map into this file. And now you can choose OK. If you forget to do this step, it may not work for you later. So I'll click OK. What's going to happen is that's going to create an export of this point feature into your geodatabase. So now you can take this previous one that you've imported and just delete it. That if I expand the attribute table, so I right click on that and choose attribute table, you see that it has a very simple table with all the points and an elevation number right there. Right now, the elevation is set to 0 because those points right now are just flat on the base elevation. So here's the fun part. We're going to take each one of these points and we're going to ask GIS to find out at each location of the point, how high is it relative to the DEM that we have. So there's a geoprocessing tool called Add Surface Information. Just choose the first one that comes up when you search for that. It's the one in 3D Analyst tool, so choose that. So input features, these are going to be those points. So expand this window, choose section elevation points, input surface. So choose that one if you have it downloaded. And then check this Z as your output property so that it captures the elevation along the raster. That's what Z stands for. It's a Z elevation. And then Z factor, you remember this guy, Z factor. Every DEM is in meters. So you need, in order for the units to be in feet, you need to add the conversion factor, 3.28084. And that's all you need to do. Then you just run at the bottom and adding it to the table. So now if I go to the attribute table of this, you'll see that there'll be a new field called Z right there. See the number right there. That number is the height, spot elevation at that point there. One last step we need to do before we bring this into Rhino again. The way that Rhino, or rather CAD exports in GIS read elevation is that if there's an attribute table with elevation in there. So if there's a number in elevation, when you export that to CAD, it'll move that element to that elevation. So we need just to simply take this number here and copy it to the elevation table. So it's easy to do. Just right click on the elevation column, right click on the header, then choose calculate field. And then in this window here, you just simply go down to where you see elevation equals right there. Just double click on Z and that just automatically fills it into that. Then choose OK. And now you see that right there. Let me expand this so you can see the whole thing. That number has now been copied over to that. So now we're done. So close that. We're going to take this here and we're going to export to CAD again. So go back to geoprocessing, go back to your export to CAD conversion tool. Input features will be elevation points, output file. I'm going to click on that folder there. I'm just going to save over section extents. Click on that. Just choose save over that. Overwrite. Yes. In environments, we'll choose output to be the current map and then choose run. All right, now I can save this. So now we jump back into Rhino right here. I'm going to just turn off this points layer for now because we don't need that. And I'm going to import that new file they just created. So import section extents, choose open, and then choose OK. And what you will notice is a new layer of points has come in. I'm going to go into perspective view. You see, if you zoom in, you just see these are all the individual points, but they've been moved to that elevation of the DEM that we've created. So how do we take these points that we imported and turn them into a surface? Let me just create a layer. I'll call this one mesh. I'll set that to be the current layer. And then what you do, you use a tool called mesh patch. Select curves and points. So I'm going to click on the layer that has the points, right click on that layer, choose select objects, hit enter, and then it says, is there any holes? There are no holes, so hit enter again. Now turn off the point layer. Now you see that this is what we've created. If you're in a wireframe view, it looks like just a bunch of wireframes, but you can go to, say, for instance, a rendered view. So what we quite literally have done through this whole process is we've taken the LiDAR DEM and we modeled it in 3D. And with the really cool part of this, let's create a new layer. Let's call it contour. Let's create a new layer called contour. I'll make that the current layer. We're gonna create contours from this. I'm gonna type in contour, select objects for contours. I'll choose this mesh, hit enter. Base point was going to be the bottom of that line. Direction perpendicular will just be the top of that line. And the distance between contours is 1. Hit enter. And then one thing I would do is just make sure that these are set to the contour layer. So while they're still selected, I'll just go to properties and just make sure that, yes, in fact, they did go to the contour layer. Okay, so we've gotten to this point in the modeling process. And now what we're going to do is we're going to give it some texture. The easiest way to put texture on geospatial modeled surfaces is just to put the aerial image on top of it. So right here, I have that drone imagery that I took of downtown East brought into GIS. And we're going to create a file that we use as a texture for this right here. Click on Elba in the table of contents, double click on that. It brings up a map properties. And then there's a clip layers option right there. If you check on that option, you expand this window, you can clip to an outline. So I choose that option. Then you see it gives you all the layers that are shape files. And you can click on, let's say, for instance, section extents. You hit apply and then just choose OK. And what happened now is it visually clips out anything outside of that extent. What I'm going to do is we're just going to hide all the layers except for the aerial. So what we'll do is we'll create a layout, go to Insert, New Layout, and then just pick one of the page sizes that is a good starting point for this. So I'll choose, say, this 12 by 18 page right here. And then in here, we need to add a map frame. So in the insert, just choose map frame, and then just choose the one that looks like the one that we just looked at. So in this case, this is one right here. And then just click, drag to add that into this layout here. And then what we'll do is with this selected, we'll go into the layout tab at the top, and then go over to this activate button right there. And then just kind of scale this so that it fills as best as possible the entire page. That looks good to me. So then go back to the layout here and then choose close activation. And then this is ready to go. So now what we'll do is we'll go to share, export layout, choose one of the raster options. So just choose GeoTIFF. In file type here, we're going to choose a JPEG this time. Resolution right here, right now it's set to 300 DPI. When I tested this, actually, I bumped it up to 600 and it still worked totally okay because the actual file size wasn't that larger. So we'll choose 600 and then give it a location. So I'll just click on the folder here and I'll just save it on my desktop. Then choose save, export. Now that you finished that, I'll just save this ArcGIS file and we'll minimize this for now. We've done our duty there. I'll just go to my desktop briefly and just kind of look at this export we've created. It's only 8.5 megabytes. If I open that here, I just click on the full resolution. It's still really good. You can still see a lot of detail. So we've managed to balance resolution and detail. So in Rhino, I'm going to go into the top view. I'm going to turn off the mesh, leave section extents on. I'll actually lock that layer. And then we'll create a new layer and call this one aerial texture. Double click on that to make that the current layer. And we're going to use a picture plane to bring in the texture. So the picture plane is in this surface button right there. You'll see this little option called add a picture plane. We'll choose that. And then it brings up a window that allows you to pick a file. We'll choose Summerlin Park Aerial, choose open. And then in the top view, make sure you're in the top view, we'll just simply click, load, and you see now it basically allows us to bring in that picture as a surface. And now you see basically what you need to do is you need to take this shape here and make it match the scale of the original section extents. I would use the scale tool. So I'll type in scale. Base point is going to be this corner that we've made perfect. You zoom out, go to the other corner, click on that corner, then scale it to that. And now we've aligned this texture perfectly with that rectangle. So go back to a 3D view. Now you can turn on that mesh again. Okay. So here's what we do. To put this texture onto this model here, you right click on the layer that has all the 3D section elevation, select objects. While that's selected, you go into the properties tab of Rhino. You go to the little paint material tool right there in properties. There's a big button that says match. So you click on match, then choose this aerial down there. Now, it's going to put that texture on here. If I click out of it, you don't see anything. You need to go to a view that allows you to view textures. So an easy way to do that is to basically go into your display options. While you have shaded turned on, you can go into shading settings right here. It says custom material for all objects. If you expand that, you can just choose rendering material and click OK. Now you see this doesn't look correct. The reason it looks incorrect is because you need to add a UV texture projection. Right click on the mesh, select objects, so those objects are selected again. You go back to properties, you go to the texture mapping, which looks like a piece of wallpaper. Click on that. The one you want to choose is one called Apply Planar Mapping. It's the fourth one from the left. Click on that. First corner of the bounding box is quite literally the first corner of this. Choose that. The next corner is going to be the next corner right here. When it says UV or UVW, you just click on UV. Now you can turn off that aerial texture. So now you've successfully taken the high-res aerial, you've brought into Rhino, and you've projected it onto the mesh. I'm going to add a plane on this side right here, because right now the section has no thickness to it. Go to the section extents layer just to use that as a default layer. I'll turn off the mesh temporarily. I'll turn on this border. I'm going to use this bottom edge here, type a tool called extrude curve. Make sure that this extrusion is not solid, and just extrude it until it basically overlaps with that top border. Then we use that top border to clip this box. So type in split, and we'll choose this box to split, hit enter, choose this, hit enter. And now you can take that, you can delete that, and I can turn on this mesh. So now I've kind of created this little thing that looks kind of like a section model. One minor thing is the orientation of faces. Go to those display options, and we want to go into this back face settings menu right here. And I'm going to choose this object called single color for all back faces. I'll choose that. And I'm going to choose a color that's just like a bright yellow. Click OK. Now you see what just happened. You see how the water turned yellow? That means the orientation of that surface is upside down. And if you brought this into Twinmotion, it would be invisible. So if that ever happens, you click on that feature, you just type in flip, and just flips it. Now, with that all set up, we're going to go into the world of Twinmotion. If you've installed Twinmotion, you should know that it involves Epic Games to run. So I have Twinmotion right here. Just go to the one that's the latest year. So I'll choose that and we'll launch it. Twinmotion is a real-time rendering tool. So that means it requires a good graphics card to run. We can thank the video game industry for where we are today. The only reason we can do this is because kids, we just want our games. We love our video games. Because we like our video games, our computers are now equipped with the ability to play video games. We can now take advantage of the power of that to do real-time rendering and essentially write your own worlds. So in Twinmotion, choose new scene, click on that, and that opens up this Twinmotion environment that we can start to work in. Now, Twinmotion, if I expand this menu on the right side, you can click on objects to automatically select them. In here, let's click on, say, for instance, cylinder, and it just highlights that. You can choose the F key, and that automatically zooms to that. So remember the F key, remember the F key. You click on the F key, you can zoom back to an object. What I'm going to do is whenever you open Twinmotion, it just starts with this starting base here with a pedestal, cylinder, something. I'm just going to take all these. I'll shift select all these and just hit delete. And then I'm also going to delete this starting base folder here, this starting landscape, which is this sand dune in the back. I'll delete that. And then the starting ground here, this tile base, we'll delete that. I just want to create a very simple plain world. To bring Rhino geometry into Twinmotion, you will have needed to download this little plugin called Datasmith Extender or something. I send it in my email, and so you need to follow that. Basically, if you have that downloaded in Rhino, you should see this Datasmith tab. So what you want to do is make sure your model is saved and choose synchronize right there. And basically what's going to start to do is going to start to take this and link it into Twinmotion. So I'll go back to Twinmotion, and you're going to want to go to this import button at the bottom. And then right here, you see this plus icon, choose imports, choose this direct link option. Let me choose import and see what happens. Let's click on this mesh and then hit F. So now you can begin to just mess around with seeing this in Twinmotion, okay? Once you have zoomed into the model here, one thing to note is that the sync should now be active. So what that means is this, is if I go back into Rhino, and let's say we want to create a surface that represents the water level, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this. I'm going to create a layer called water. We'll set that to be the current layer. And then what I'll do is I'm going to select that little section extents rectangle. Remember that rectangle there? And I'm going to type in a tool called planar surface. And now that surface is on this water level right here. So I'm just going to move that, into the model here. And you can see that it's inverted. So I'll just type on that and type in flip. So it's no longer yellow. If you click synchronize, that if you go back to Twinmotion, then so you see that this comes in. So the reason I brought that in is because we're going to use this to create a surface of water. So any feature that you bring into Twinmotion, you can apply textures to. I would not go crazy with this just yet. I would keep it simple, but you can see on the left side here, there is a library button. If you don't see that on the bottom, you can click on library to bring up these library options. And then you have all these things you can do. So I'll choose materials. And if you go in materials, you should see all these options for materials, including water near the bottom. I'll choose water and have these water options. So I'll choose river 2 and just drag that on top of that. So now you have this surface that represents the water level. One thing you can do is once you have that created, you see on the right-hand side, you have that water feature there and that B rep. You can use that to basically create this, condition where you can kind of really capture a very detailed water level. So this is great when you want to create scenarios of your design that shows the various flooding conditions. And now what we'll do is we'll add a little bit of vegetation onto this model here. So one thing that you should play with is this vegetation option in the library right there. So if I choose vegetation, you have trees, grasses. Let's click on trees for now. There's an okay library of trees in here that you can play with. To put a tree into this model, you can click on one of the species. Let's choose this oak. Plop it onto, you see it just automatically plops it onto the model. You see that every time I put it on, it kind of does a little bit of randomization so that they look a little bit different. So it's not just copy and paste. If you click on a tree, you have these options in terms of its age. At the bottom of Twinmotion, there is this populate button right there. If I choose that, then there's this foliage button right here. And then there's this paint button right here. You see what you can do is you can put in sample models that can be painted onto the model. So you could put a couple of plants. So let's put in this willow. Let's put in the sweet gum. Let's put in the catalpa. You see now in Twinmotion, there's this little green circle. You can change the side of that circle by expanding this little slider down there. And then when you paint, it places planting, puts those species together. Think of this as like a quick way to mass out vegetation. So these series of tools, treat them as starting points for your modeling. We need to make sure that we use this for what it is, but not use this as, let's say, like the final product. The majority of the work needs to be done after we render this out. Obviously, like I know like the site is a lot more dense with trees than we have here. So this is just something that we have to keep in mind, is that this is not meant to be like, oh, an easy way to put plants, but rather this is just a starting point. And then obviously you can go back to library. Probably a more practical thing to add is the characters. You can put humans into the model. I wouldn't touch animated humans just yet. I would just go to the simpler option, like these posed humans here. Casual is probably the way to go for the majority of this. So we'll just choose a person that looks normal and put them on the levee wall right there. Just hover over the model, choose this little eyeball pedestrian mode. So if we choose pedestrian mode, walking around, as if you were there. You can imagine, again, we were walking up this levee, and now we're on the top of the levee. Be very careful of pedestrian mode though, because if you fall off the cliff, you fall off the cliff. So if that happens, you just got to like go back to drone mode, then choose like one of the mesh objects, and then hit F to kind of go back. But now let's get into the work involved in terms of creating a view that we export out. So the first thing we do is we navigate around this until we set ourselves up with a view that we want to create. But pick a view that's interesting and dynamic. In order to modify the view a bit, you need to go into this ambience button in the side here. And this allows you to get a few camera tools that you can play with. And in environments right there, yeah, there's the time of day. So this is where you set the lighting condition of this model to get that to look correct. But you're gonna want to make sure that in location down here, expand that. And you see that actually it's like setting the location to be in France. So just move that arrow to kind of be close enough to where Alabama is. And now we are in Alabama. And now the lighting condition should be a little bit more appropriate down here. So you can kind of give a bit more of a dramatic morning sun or a bit more of a dramatic evening sun. I highly recommend that the lighting that you produce for these renderings has very powerful lighting to it. Like really push those shadows. I kind of like what we have here, so we'll keep this as is. Another thing we want to adjust in camera, there's field of view. So this is really important that we make sure that the field of view is appropriate. So you can see if we reduce the field of view, it flattens the image. If we increase the field of view, it makes it too dramatic. Generally speaking, super wide angle views like this aren't great because it makes this edges scaled and distorted and weird looking. It's probably better to err towards the side of tighter field of views, like around something like this, if you don't know what to do. Let's just start the process of creating a view. Down here, there's this media button. I'll choose media. You can create images and choose that to create an image. And now what's going to happen is it's going to simply create a view that we can export out. When you create this image here, it's going to save the settings that we set here. You can go back here and you can see that now field of view has changed to focal length. In FX, we might touch on this a little bit because there's a very interesting mode in here called clay render that might be useful. This might come in handy for colorizing or photoshopping elements. And you can see here, for instance, in color, you can change it to be like a white, you can change it to be a red. But also what's powerful about this is you can highlight specific elements. So you see down here, glass, landscape, vegetation. So I'm gonna uncheck these objects. And you can see, for instance, you can check characters and then the people are only ones that are highlighted, or you can check vegetation, only the vegetation is highlighted. And then the last one is image right here. This is where you establish the resolution of your image. So down here, we have the pixel count. Right now it's 1920 by 1080. So we're going to do a 36-inch by 18-inch image. I'll change that to be 7200, and then height 3600. And so that's what it's going to look like when it exports. This is really important, is make sure that you save all these changes as you made it into this view. So down here, if I hover over image, there's this little refresh right there. I click on refresh. That just makes sure that everything we have adjusted in the sliders and everything here is saved. Now what we're going to do is we're going to choose this export button at the bottom, and then the export window opens up here. You choose image for your rendering. You choose PNG for the format. To add an image to render, you choose this little plus icon there. And then you see these are the images that we have set in our media. So I'll click on that again. Choose this. Now it's chosen. And now if you go back here, now see that's chosen as one. And then if you scroll to the bottom, there's a start export button. So I choose start export, choose your desktop, then select folder. And now it's going to begin exporting this view out. Finally finished exporting. So one thing I'm going to do is with this render setup, I want to bring in a couple of Linework layers from Rhino to align with this render. So what I'm gonna do is I'll go into the properties, and then in wallpaper, I'll click on these dots next to file name, and then we'll go click on the image that we've just exported and choose open. In Rhino, you see there is a lens length right here set to 50. Put in 37 to start, and now try to get this to somewhat align. And then what you might need to do as you're getting it aligned, you see how like it's not fully aligning with the background. Like it feels like the background is not wide angle enough. 46, and just keep messing with it until, oh, that's not bad. Hey, let's go 47. There is no secret. The secret is suffer through it until you get it to line. And then once you get it to line, make sure you save this by going to the named views, choosing save, calling this one section perspective aligned. And now you've preserved this view. So now what we can do is this. You can uncheck this here. So now we have kind of a starting point for this. Before we export this out, So I want to add some dimensions to this. I'll turn on this section extents here so I get that C-plane there. And I'll type in C-plane, then choose surface, click on this here. So just click anywhere on this, enter. Now C-plane is set to that face right there. Let's put in a couple dimensions. So I'll go into dimension, choose linear dimension. Let's get some basic dimensions of, say, for instance, the path. So let's imagine we're starting at this here, and then now I choose, and now you see that dimension is aligned with that plane. So let's just choose a couple of things to put on as a starting point. Let's get the side of the berm there. It's going to get the side between the levee wall to the P River as a basic dimension. And let's get the side of the bank of the P River as a dimension. Let's get the base of this as a dimension. One thing you also want to do is make sure that these dimensions are graphically the way you want it to look before you export it. Click on one of those dimensions, go to properties, and then you can edit the style here. So I would choose edit style in the properties right there. You want to make sure that your font is consistent with your graphic style. And now it's a little bit ready for use. And now we're ready to export this out. So hide everything that's not a vector. We'll create a layout view, new layout. We'll make this layout 36 inches long by 18 inches high. Click OK. If you double click inside the layout, this is when you can begin to change the view or just pick a named view that you've created. So I'll go to the name view and double click on there. Double click outside of that. If I type in units, if you go to annotation styles, check enable layout space scaling and click OK. You see what just happened? By checking that box, it just maintains the way it looked. Now you can take this and you can export this out. With the layout set, I'll just right click on this, choose print. A Rhino PDF is fine. Make sure vector output is checked. Make sure print color is checked. Choose print, save, minimize, Photoshop, and a little bit of Illustrator. Open these two programs. With Illustrator, I'll open the export that we've just created. So here it is. What I would first do is create a couple of layers, select object, flipping masks. I'll hit delete. I'll expand the layer, and then I'll just ungroup. And then I'll use the select same tool. So I'll select on the contours, for instance, move things. Now I'll just select everything of the same look and feel, move that to a new layer, including the text. And now just adjust some of the line weights. So for instance, this section line here, is right now set to red. I'll make that like 2 points. I'll make it black. I will set the contours. Let's set them to be 0.25. So file, save as, Illustrator file, save. So here's what we do. In Photoshop, let's bring in the Illustrator file as a smart object. So I'll choose place linked. There it is right there. I'll click on that, click place. So make sure you choose crop box. Okay. Then you just need to scale it. Hit enter to align it. Now what we do is we can use color selection tool to mask out some of this stuff here. Then we'll use a mask. If I hold the Alt key and choose mask, it masks the inverse of that. To clean this up here, I'll hit the stroke key that's above the enter key. Then just adjust this mask using a brush, and then just simply fix some of the stuff that got selected incorrectly. Really simply like that. So now that's more or less cleaned up. We turn the section line on, and then what we'll do is we'll add a background. So I'll choose the solid color option there, make it a white background, move it below that. Renderings are too colorful. You need to take the saturation and reduce it by like 25% or 30%. I also like to just take the vibrance and just move it up a little bit like this. Renderings come out very clean, and I like to add film grain to images to kind of give things a cinematic look to it. So to add film grain, you create a new layer, a solid color, make that solid color a 50% gray, and just make sure that this is set to 50. Choose OK. While that's selected, I will go into filter, noise, add noise. It says something, something, convert to smart object. And then right here, you can see some noise that's produced. Just play with the slider, maybe make it 15, click OK, then choose overlay. What we've done, we've taken this, kind of add this like cinematic look to it, which I think kind of adds a little bit of dirtiness, which makes things look convincing. Last step you do is just clean up some things that are distracting. So you can see some of the line work in the background. It's kind of over the trees and it's a little bit distracting. So just use masks to clean things up. mask out some of that stuff that you see there. Just play with this to like add some of that mist effect to the layer. So it kind of adds like a little bit of mist quality. And also what's nice is that it allows you to like maybe mask out some of the background in a little bit more of a fluid way that's a little bit less distracting like that. So I promised you that we would get to something like this, and I got kind of close. And I'm going to open this here. And essentially what we did was brought in the rendering. I'm going to show you a way that you can begin to add photographic assets to this. We need to find a photographic asset that could be used. Say, for instance, let's focus on this bank of planting right here. Let's say this one right here. I'm going to try to grab this little edge of the riverbank, and we're going to try to put that right around there. So here's my quick way of doing that, snipping tool. So on my computer, the shortcut for snipping tool is the window key, Shift S, and then that just allows me to just quickly snip a zone. But once you do that, you can just paste it into Photoshop like that. So it's in. Just kind of scale it, rotate it, skew it until it starts to fill in the area that you need it to cover. Then I'll add a mask to it. So click on the mask tool. Then we'll just begin to fuzz out the perimeter using a very simple soft brush. And then we bring back plant matter using those plant brushes. So let's bring, say this brush right here. And we'll just use that to bring back some plant matter. For areas that are kind of over the water here, you might do this, which is to just rotate this brush like so. So you're using the side of it. I would just give this a bit of transparency. So I'll just like maybe bring it down to like 80%. That way it sort of begins to blend in a little bit closer to the image behind it. And remember that, you're still going to have the other filters on top of it, like the desaturation and the film grain to kind of give it a little bit of color that matches the rest of the image. One thing I always also like to do whenever I'm doing this kind of work here, I like to create a painting layer that I use to increase highlights and deeper shadows. So the way I do that is I just create another layer on top of everything. I will give that an overlay. I will make it about 50%. And then what I'll do is I'll find a simple brush, something that's just very simple. Let's try this. So you can see what I'm doing. Like I'm beginning to add a little bit of shadow to those dark areas. It's a very, very simple technique. If I go into the white, and so now you're adding highlights. So now it's a nice way to say, for instance, you want to add a little bit of bright areas on tops of your trees. I'll call this one, say, for instance, I'll call this layer highlights and shadows. So after you work on it for a little bit, this is kind of what you can work towards. Once you're happy with the perspective, now you save this Photoshop file, and then we'll go into InDesign. Minimize this, and I'll go into InDesign. I'll go create a new file, and then when I'm creating a new file, I will always make sure that my units are set to inches. Then in here, width 36 inches, height 18 inches. Make sure units are correct. Make sure facing pages is unchecked. Then you choose Create. If you open the layers panel on the side, so whenever I'm creating an InDesign file, I always create two layers. The bottom layer we'll call that image, and the top layer, we'll call that annotation. So I'll select image as my current layer, and then I'll hit Control D, and I'm going to choose the Photoshop file, which is this one right here. So I'll click Open. So let's create a few annotations that we'll place on here. I'll create a bold label here, and I'll call this one the title of map or of drawing. When you select this text box, you go to your character styles. Then while this text box is selected, you just choose this plus icon, create new style. Double click on that, call it title. If you select those two text boxes and choose the title, it automatically changes it to be the style. So what I like to do is I like to make a few character styles for all the elements of your drawing. So the title is one thing, body text is another. Then click on that, choose the plus icon. I'll call this one body. Add some simple things. So let's add a legend to this. And then I like to use keynotes. So the keynote system is a very standardized way to begin to make your image read well. I'll create a simple letter right there, A. And then I like to use either a hexagon or a circle. Then what I'll do is simply take those two and I'll group it. So Control G to group them together. And then I'll just simply take that, move it here. And then you can have a simple keynote legend. Then once you have your keynotes, then you take these keynotes and you plop them on the plan. That amount of effort that you put into these types of drawings will make you into a much better designer, and also make it so that you show that you're thinking in a detail-oriented way. Because sometimes I feel like drawings, we just rush through them. You want to make sure that quality and that craft shows through when you're working on this. So that is my InDesign and Photoshop formatting and composition tutorial.